Take my hand now. That's what the giant Apache heard in the burning heat of the desert. The wind was still, the sand was red, and a pregnant girl lay half buried by the arroyo. Alone, nearly gone. He lifted her from the dust, thinking. It was just mercy. But mercy turned to danger the moment he learned who hunted her. Men on horseback, carrying the law in one hand and a price in the other. A judge's word, a railroad's gold, and a secret that could wipe out a bloodline. The cabin in the pines was meant to hide her. Instead, it lit a fuse. Because the child she carries is the key to land, water, and a fight that will split this valley in two. The riders are coming. The storm is rising. And every step toward safety takes them deeper into the fire. When the gun smoke clears, will she still have a hand to hold, or will the desert take them both? Your reactions reaffirm something simple yet powerful, that stories still shape us, even in silence. If you believe in the soft endurance of love, truth, and doing what's right, then you're exactly why these stories exist. The relentless Arizona sun beat down on the parched earth, casting long shadows across the dry arroyo where Taza guided. His pack mule with practiced care. His weathered hands held the lead rope loosely as he scanned the rocky ground for the bright, purple fruit of the prickly pear cactus. The thorny plants grew in abundance here, their paddle-shaped leaves providing food for both man and beast during the harsh summer months. Taza's keen eyes noticed every detail, the scatter of quail tracks in the dust, the way the desert wind had carved ripples in the sand, the distant cry of a red-tailed hawk circling overhead. His buckskin shirt was dark with sweat, but he moved with the measured patience of one who knew the desert's ways. The faint sound almost escaped his notice. A whisper carried on the hot breeze. Double quotes, please. Take my hand now. Taza pulled his mule to a halt, his head turning slowly as he listened. The voice came again, weaker this time, drifting from behind a stand of mesquite. He secured the mule to a sturdy branch and moved forward with silent steps, his moccasins leaving barely a trace in the soft sand. There, crumpled in the meager shade of a rocky overhang, lay a young woman. Her calico dress was torn and dust-covered, her pale skin angry red from sun exposure. Even from several paces away, Taza could see her swollen belly. She was heavy with child. A cracked canteen lay useless beside her outstretched hand, and flies buzzed persistently around her face. Taza approached carefully, speaking softly in English. "Be still, I will help." The woman's eyes fluttered open, revealing fever-bright blue irises in her sunburned face. Her cracked lips moved, but only a dry whisper emerged. Taza knelt beside her, noting how her blonde hair was matted with dust and sweat. He reached for his own canteen, cradling her head gently. "Small sips," he instructed, letting a few drops of precious water fall onto her parched lips. "Too much will make you sick." She managed a few swallows before coughing weakly. "Thank you." She breathed. "Please. Don't take me back to them." Taza's expression remained calm, but his dark eyes narrowed slightly at her words. He examined the ground around her, reading the story written in the earth. Wagon ruts led away toward the west, already softened by wind and time, at least 3 or 4 days old. A single set of smaller footprints showed where she had walked, stumbled, and finally collapsed. The woman, little more than a girl, really, tried to sit up but fell back with a weak cry. Taza steadied her with a strong hand. "I am called Taza," he said. "You are very sick from the sun. What is your name?" "Clara," she whispered. "Clara Bell." Taza nodded, already planning. The mission at Mesquite Crossing lay 2 days' ride to the north, and the young woman needed shelter and care quickly. The sun was finally sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. Night travel would be safer for someone in her condition. He returned to his mule, retrieving his heavy wool saddle blanket. The desert nights grew cold, even in July. With gentle efficiency, He wrapped Clara in the blanket, noting how she flinched at first before allowing his help. Her belly was very round beneath the wool. The child would come soon. "I will take you to the mission," he explained as he worked. "The sisters there will help you and your baby. Can you sit a horse?" Clara nodded weakly, though fear flickered in her eyes. "But please, not west. Don't let them find me." "No one will find you," Taza assured her, his deep voice calm and certain. He lifted her carefully, noting how light she felt despite her pregnancy. Years of experience tracking and hunting had given him tremendous strength, and he carried her to his mule with ease. The pack saddle wasn't made for riding, but Taza rearranged his supplies to create a secure seat. He helped Clara settle, keeping the blanket tucked around her shoulders, then gathered the mule's lead rope. The first stars were appearing in the darkening sky as he began walking, leading the mule along the smoothest path he could find. Night air grew cool and sweet as they traveled, the quiet broken only by the soft click of the mule's hooves on stone and the occasional cry of a coyote in the distance. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness, but Taza kept a close watch, stopping regularly to give her small sips of water. When she was awake, her hands clutched protectively at her belly, and her eyes darted fearfully at every shadow. Tazm maintained a steady pace through the darkness, his feet finding safe passage by starlight and memory. He had traveled these trails countless times, trading with settlers and other tribes, hunting in the high country, and bringing news between scattered communities. The desert was his home, and he read its signs as easily as the mission priests read their books. As they passed beneath a towering saguaro cactus, its arms raised like a silent sentinel against the star-filled sky, Clara stirred. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice slightly stronger after hours of rest and careful sips of water. Taza walked several steps before answering. "The desert shows no favor," he said finally. "It kills the strong and the weak, the good and the bad. But people must choose to help or harm." He glanced back at her, his dark eyes reflecting starlight. "I choose to help." Clara pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, watching this tall, quiet man who had appeared like a miracle in her darkest hour. "Thank you," she whispered. And Taza inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. They continued through the cool darkness, man and mule and desperate mother-to-be, moving steadily northward as the stars wheeled overhead. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, Clara Belle was safe, wrapped in a rough wool blanket and guided by silent, steady hands through the vast Arizona night. The first pale light of dawn painted the eastern sky as Taza guided his mule toward the adobe walls of Mesquite Crossing's mission. The square bell tower rose against the lightening horizon, its simple cross a dark silhouette against the rose-gold morning. Clara stirred beneath the wool blanket, her face less flushed after the cool night journey. The mission's heavy wooden gates stood open in welcome, and the courtyard beyond lay quiet except for the soft cooing of mourning doves. As they entered, Reverend Thomas Hawley emerged from the chapel door, his silver hair catching the early light. The preacher's wiry frame moved with surprising quickness as he descended the stone steps, his deep-set eyes taking in the scene before him. "Taza," he began warmly, then stopped short as he recognized Clara. His weathered face grew serious. "Lord have mercy," he whispered, quickly crossing the courtyard. "Miss Clara Belle." Clara's eyes widened with recognition, but exhaustion and dehydration overwhelmed her. As Taza helped her down from the mule, her legs buckled. The two men supported her into the chapel, where the thick adobe walls kept the air cool and dim. She collapsed onto a rough wooden bench, her breathing shallow. "Sister Mary," Reverend Hawley called toward the back rooms. "Bring water and clean linens." He turned to Taza, speaking in a low voice. "Where did you find her?" "In the arroyo near Eagle Rock," Taza replied quietly. "She was alone, sunsick." The preacher's lined face grew grave. She's Judge Keen's stepdaughter, his ward since her mother passed last winter. He glanced at Clara, who had curled onto her side on the bench. The judge has been ruthless in his rulings against our Apache neighbors. Any water rights, grazing claims, he finds ways to strike them down. Sister Mary hurried in with a clay pitcher and stack of linens. As she tended to Clara, Reverend Holly led Taza to the mission's small kitchen. The morning sun slanted through narrow windows as the preacher stirred a pot of cornmeal mush heating on the wood stove. The simple room smelled of wood smoke and yesterday's bread. She needs real food, Holly said, spooning the mush into 2 wooden bowls. But we'll start with this. Her stomach won't handle much after such hardship. They brought the food to Clara, who had been helped to sit up by Sister Mary. Her face was cleaned of dust, but dark circles shadowed her eyes. She took small bites of the warm mush, her hands trembling. "My husband," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. The railroad guards shot him. Just for fishing in the creek. Her spoon clattered against the bowl. "They're hunting me now. The judge, he wants." She pressed her hands to her swollen belly, unable to continue. Reverend Holly touched her shoulder gently. "You need rest, child. Sister Mary will show you to the guest room." He waited until the women had gone before turning to Taza. "Keen has bounty men in his pocket, cruel men who ask no questions. If they find her here..." He left the thought unfinished. Taza stood at the window, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the flagstone floor. "I will watch," he said simply. The morning grew hot as Clara slept in the mission's small guest room. Taza moved silently through the courtyard, checking sight lines and listening for approaching horses. Around mid-morning, a dust cloud rose. From the eastern road, a smart buggy pulled by a matched pair of bays rolled through the gates, bringing a well-dressed man in a dark suit and polished boots. "Reverend Hall." The man called out cheerfully, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Silas Murrow, Arizona and Pacific Railroad. Might we speak inside? The sun is fearsome." Holly led the railroad agent into his study, a spare room lined with books. Taza positioned himself near the open window, pretending to repair a saddle while listening carefully. "The railroad values good neighbors, Reverend," Murrow's smooth voice carried clearly. "That well of yours, pure, sweet water, we'd pay handsomely for the rights. The mission would want for nothing. This well serves more than just the mission," Holly replied firmly. "The local families, both settler and Apache, depend on it. I cannot and will not sell." "Now, Reverend," Murrow's tone cooled slightly, "progress can't be stopped. Better to profit from it than stand in its way. Think carefully on our offer." The agent's buggy had barely cleared the gates when Clara appeared. In the chapel doorway, her face pale but determined. She crossed the courtyard to where Taza sat in the shade, still working on the saddle. Her fingers gripped his rough hand with surprising strength. "I cannot go back to him," she whispered, her blue eyes intense. "If Keen finds me, I cannot be taken alive. My baby, she's all I have left of my husband. The judge will never accept." Her Apache blood. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Please, help me." Taza covered her trembling hand with his own, his dark eyes meeting hers steadily. The mission bell tolled the evening hour as shadows lengthened across the courtyard, marking the end of another day in the harsh Arizona territory and the beginning of a desperate struggle for survival. Dawn crept over Mesquite Crossing, painting the adobe walls golden. Taza moved through the mission courtyard with a wooden bucket in hand, his moccasins silent on the packed earth. The old well's windmill creaked softly in the morning breeze, its silver blades catching the early light dot as he drew water. A flicker of movement caught his eye. Through one of the mission's narrow windows, he glimpsed Clara standing in the chapel, her hand resting on the rough-hewn altar. But he wasn't the only one who noticed her. Outside the mission wall, Silas Murrow sat. Astride his bay horse, his keen gaze fixed on that same window. A knowing smile spread across the railroad agent's face, and he wheeled his mount around, kicking up dust as he galloped eastward toward town. Taz's heart quickened. He abandoned the water bucket and strode into the chapel, finding Reverend Hale already hurrying toward the vestry. The old preacher's face was drawn with worry. "Quickly," Hale whispered, gesturing for them to follow. The small vestry smelled of beeswax candles and old hymnals. Clara joined them, her face pale in the dim light filtering through the high window. "Murrow saw you," Hale said, his voice urgent but gentle. "That man's tongue wags faster than a rattler's. Tail, by nightfall, every bounty hunter in the territory will know where you are." He gripped Clara's trembling hands. "Child, you must leave. Now." Clara's blue eyes filled with tears. "But where can I go?" She pressed one hand to her swollen belly. "In my condition, I'll only slow anyone down. My cabin," Taza said quietly. "In the White Mountains. 2 days' ride northeast." He met her gaze steadily. "The path is hard, but safe," Reverend Hale nodded. "It's your best chance, Clara. Taza knows every hidden trail, every spring." He squeezed her hands once more. "Wait for sunset, then go with." "Godspeed." The day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Sister Mary helped Clara pack dried meat, cornbread, and extra blankets while Taza prepared his horses. As the sun finally sank behind the western mesas, they slipped out through the mission's back gate. The desert night wrapped around them like a cool blanket. Taza led them north along dry creek beds and through stands of scraggly juniper, avoiding the main trails. Clara rode silently, clinging to her saddle horn as they picked their way through the darkness. The stars wheeled overhead, marking the hours until Clara's strength began to fade. "I need to rest," she whispered, her voice rough with exhaustion. "Just for a moment." Taza guided them into a dense mesquite thicket, the thorny branches forming a natural shelter. He helped Clara down from her horse, steadying her as her legs trembled. Within minutes, he had a small fire burning, feeding it carefully with mesquite wood that gave off little smoke. Clara sank down on his unrolled bedding, her face ghostly in the firelight. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I'm not as strong as I should." "You are stronger than you know," Taza replied, offering her water from his canteen. The flames cast dancing shadows as Clara drew a shaky breath. "My husband," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thomas was half Apache. His father had a homestead near Eagle Creek with good water rights." She twisted her hands in her skirt. "Judge Keene found a way to void the claim. Said the Apache blood made it invalid. Thomas's father lost everything." Taza added another small branch to the fire, waiting patiently for her to continue. "When Thomas and I married, the judge was furious, called it an abomination." Her hand moved protectively over her belly. "Now there's a railroad contract worth thousands, but it needs clean title to the land. No native claims can exist." Tears slid down her cheeks. "That's why he wants me back. He'll make sure this baby never lives to claim her birthright." Taza moved closer, his massive frame blocking the cool night wind. "Your child carries the blood of two peoples," he said softly. "Like the mesquite tree, with roots both deep and wide, strong blood." He met her tear-filled eyes. "I swear by the Creator, no harm will come to either of you." Clara's shoulders sagged with exhaustion and relief. She leaned back against his bedroll, her eyes growing heavy. "Thank you," she whispered as sleep overtook her. Taza settled himself against a mesquite trunk, his Winchester across his knees. The fire burned down to glowing coals that cast a faint red light across Clara's sleeping face. His keen ears caught the distant yip of coyotes, the rustle of night wind through the thorny branches. But beneath those familiar sounds he listened, intently for what he feared most, the rhythm of approaching hoofbeats that would mean their hunters had picked up their trail. The night deepened around them, full of shadows and secrets. Taza kept his vigil, watching over the woman who carried within her the spark of two worlds, a spark that powerful men would kill to extinguish. The afternoon sun hung low in a hazy sky as Taza guided their horses through the scrub oak and juniper. At the base of the Mogollon foothills, Clara slumped in her saddle, her face drawn with exhaustion. The long ride had taken its toll. Her ankles were visibly swollen above her worn leather boots. "Not much further now," Taza said quietly, leading them around a granite boulder and into a small clearing. There, nestled against the rising slope, stood his cabin. Built of thick pine logs chinked with red clay, it was a modest shelter with a single window and a stone chimney that released thin wisps of smoke from the banked fire within. Clara's relief was visible as Taza helped her down from the horse. Her legs trembled as she tried to stand, and he steadied her with a gentle hand at her elbow. "Easy now," he murmured, supporting her weight as they made their way to the cabin door. Inside, the single room was warm and dim. A bed covered with a thick gray and red wool trade blanket occupied one corner. Near the stone fireplace, a simple table and two chairs stood ready. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters, filling the air with the sharp scent of sage and sweetgrass. "Rest," Taza said, guiding Clara to the bed. She sank onto it gratefully, easing her swollen feet up onto the blanket. While she settled, Taza moved quietly around the cabin, stoking the fire and gathering ingredients for supper. The familiar routine of preparing a meal centered him. He cleaned and cut the rabbit he'd snared that morning, adding it to the pot with dried corn, wild onions, and the last of his dried chili peppers. As the stew began to simmer, rain started pattering against the cedar shake roof, first a gentle whisper, then a steady drumming that filled the cabin with its soothing rhythm. Clara dozed, lulled by the sound of rain and the warmth of the fire. Taza watched her rest as he stirred the stew, noting how the worried creases in her forehead had smoothed out. Here, at least, she could breathe without looking over her shoulder. When the stew was ready, he gently woke her. They ate in comfortable silence, the rain providing a peaceful backdrop to their meal. That night, Clara slept deeply for the first time since Taza had found her in the arroyo. Morning brought clearing skies and a fresh breeze that carried the scent of wet pine needles. After a simple breakfast of corn cakes and dried fruit, Taza began showing Clara small tasks to occupy her days. He set out a basket of dried beans. That needed shelling, demonstrating how to separate the tough pods efficiently. "Like this," he said, his large hands moving with surprising delicacy as he split a pod and thumbed out the beans. Clara followed his example, and soon the quiet rhythm of work filled the cabin. Later, he brought out a torn saddlebag, teaching her how to punch neat holes in the leather with an awl before stitching it with sinew thread. Clara's clever fingers quickly mastered the technique, and pride flickered across her face at this small accomplishment. Days began to flow together in a peaceful pattern. Each dawn found Taza setting out to hunt, checking his trap lines or tracking deer through the Kakan pine forest. He always returned by mid-afternoon, often carrying rabbits or quail, sometimes with a deer quarter wrapped in fresh pine boughs. Clara grew stronger as the days passed. Her color improved, and the haunted look began to fade from her eyes. Soon, she could walk the short distance to the creek to fetch water, though Taza always kept watch from a discreet distance, his rifle close at hand. The creek became her favorite spot. She would linger there after filling her bucket, watching the clear water tumble over moss-covered rocks. Sometimes she would sit on a sun-warmed boulder, her bare feet dangling in the cool stream, and sort through the herbs Taza had taught her. To recognize yarrow for fever, willow bark for pain, mint for settling the stomach. One evening, as the setting sun painted the western sky in shades of amber and rose, Clara stood at the cabin door watching the light play through the tall pines. Taza was cleaning his rifle nearby, his movements precise and practiced. "I feel safer here than anywhere since Thomas died," she said softly, her hand resting on her growing belly. Even during our marriage, we were always looking over our shoulders, wondering when the judge would find us. She turned to look at Taza. Thank you for that, for this piece. Taza simply nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The weight of responsibility pressed heavy on his shoulders. This young woman and her unborn child, both hunted, both dependent on his protection. He checked his rifle's action one more time, the familiar metal cool under his fingers. The weapon was clean, oiled, ready. Like him, it would stand guard, keeping watch over the fragile piece they had found in this small clearing among the pines. As darkness settled over the cabin, the first stars appeared above the treetops. Inside, the fire cast warm shadows on the log walls. Clara had returned to her mending, and Taza began preparing herbs for drying. The quiet sounds of their evening tasks filled the room, the soft scrape of Clara's needle through leather, the rustle of dried plants, the pop and crackle of burning pine logs. Outside, a whip-poor-will called, its lonely song echoing through the gathering night. A week passed in quiet. Routine before the sound of hoofbeats broke the morning stillness. Taza rose from his chair by the fireplace, hand moving instinctively toward his rifle. But the familiar whistle that followed, a meadowlark's trill, made him relax. He stepped outside, raising his hand in greeting as a paint mare picked its way through the clearing, its rider's dark hair gleaming in the sunlight. Clara appeared in the doorway, watching curiously as the woman dismounted with fluid grace. She was tall and straight-backed, dressed in a calico skirt and leather moccasins adorned with intricate beadwork. Deep laugh lines framed her eyes, though her face carried a gravity that spoke of hard-earned wisdom. "My sister Nalin," Taza explained, helping unload several bulging saddlebags. Nalin approached Clara with careful steps, her eyes taking in the younger woman's condition. "Welcome, sister," she said in softly accented English, reaching out to clasp Clara's hands in her own. She added something in Apache that made Taza nod approvingly. "She says you carry a strong spirit," he translated, as Nalin began unpacking her goods on the rough-hewn table. The bounty she brought filled the small cabin with wonderful smells. Dried corn still sweet from last harvest, bundles of sage and other herbs tied with yucca fiber, and a package of smoked trout wrapped in fresh corn husks. Clara's eyes widened at the sight of the fish, her hands moving unconsciously to her stomach. "Good for baby," Nalin said, smiling as she noticed the gesture. She pulled out one more bundle, soft deerskin and colored beads for making moccasins. As the day warmed, Taza prepared a hearty supper of corn stew with the smoked trout. The three sat together outside the cabin, watching the sunset paint the hills in shades of purple and gold. Here, away from prying eyes, Nalin's features softened as she shared news from the settlements below. "Railroad men push hard for mission well," she said, her face growing serious. "Every day, more come. Some townspeople say sell, others say fight." She glanced at Taza. "Reverend Hale stands strong, but pressure grows." Taza's jaw tightened. The mission's well was one of the few reliable water sources that remained open to both settlers and Apache families. Its loss would force many of his people further into the hills. Nalin hesitated before continuing. "Judge Keene sends men with papers, bounty papers." She reached into her skirt pocket and withdrew a folded handbill. "Soon these will be everywhere. Every settlement, every trading post." Clara's hands trembled as she took the paper, though she didn't open it. She didn't need to. Her own face would be drawn there, alongside whatever lies Keene had crafted to justify her capture. As darkness settled around them, they moved inside where Taza lit the oil lamp. Its warm glow cast dancing shadows on the log walls as Nalin spread out a clean cloth and began showing Clara how to process acorn flour, a staple that had sustained her people through countless winters. "Must gather in autumn," Nalin explained, demonstrating how to crack the shells just so. "Soak in running water many days to remove bitter taste. She showed Clara how to grind the nuts using a smooth river stone, her movements precise and practiced. Clara leaned forward, asking questions about everything, not just about the flour, but about other Apache customs, about the meanings of different beadwork patterns, about traditional ways of preparing for birth. Nalin answered patiently, sometimes turning to Taza for help with English words, but mostly managing through gestures and simple phrases. "Your people have so much knowledge," Clara said softly, running her fingers through the fine acorn meal. "I wish I'd known more of this when Thomas was alive. He tried to tell me about his mother's ways, but there was so little time." Nalin reached out and squeezed Clara's hand. "Now you learn. For your child, both people's wisdom is strength." They worked late into the night, the lamp burning low as Nalin shared stories of her years as a midwife, of babies born under summer, stars and winter moons. Clara listened intently, her face showing both anxiety and hope as she learned what to expect in the months ahead. Before dawn the next morning, Nalin prepared to leave. She checked her mare's saddlebags one last time, then turned to Clara. "I return before baby comes," she promised, embracing the younger woman. "You are strong. You will do well." Clara watched from the cabin door as Nalin mounted up, her paint mare dancing slightly in the pre-dawn chill. Taza walked his sister to the edge of the clearing, their heads bent close in quiet conversation. When he returned, Clara was still, standing in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself despite the warm morning. "I never had siblings," she said quietly. "Watching you two together, I've always envied that. Having someone who looks out for you, who knows your heart without words." Taza was silent for a long moment, studying the coming dawn. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "You're not alone anymore." He turned to meet her eyes. "Family is more than blood. It is choosing to stand together, to protect what matters." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled through them. The morning sun broke over the eastern hills, flooding the clearing with golden light. In the distance, a mourning dove called, its soft notes carrying on the wind like a promise of days to come. The September morning dawned crisp and clear, but Clara barely noticed the golden light filtering through the cabin windows. She gripped the edge of the wooden table, breathing heavily as another wave of pain crashed over her. Her knuckles turned white, and sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool air. "Taza," she called out, her voice tight with urgency. "It's time. Time." Taza burst through the cabin door, dropping an armload of firewood. One look at Clara's face told him everything he needed to know. Without a word, he grabbed his rifle and powder horn, then strode to the lean-to where his horse waited. Within minutes, the sound of galloping hooves echoed through the pine trees as he rode hard toward his sister's camp. Clara paced the cabin floor, pausing every few minutes to brace herself against the wall. The contractions grew stronger as morning stretched into afternoon. She had just settled onto the bed when she heard horses approaching. Relief flooded through her as Taza and Nalin hurried inside. "Little sister," Nalin said warmly, setting down her medicine bag. She helped Clara lie back on the bed, checking her with practiced hands. "Baby comes soon. You are strong." Taza built up the fire and hung a pot of water to boil. He moved quietly, efficiently, following Nalin's instructions as she prepared her herbs and clean cloths. The cabin filled with the sharp, clean scent of pine needles as Nalin scattered them on the swept dirt floor. As the sun began to set, another horse approached. Reverend Hawley appeared in the doorway, his arms full of fresh blankets. Despite his journey, his eyes were bright and alert. "I came as soon as I got Taza's message," he said, setting down his bundle. "How is she?" "Labor progresses well," Nalin replied, crushing dried sage leaves between her palms. The pungent aroma mixed with the pine, creating a sacred atmosphere in the small space. Through the long night, Clara labored, Nalin stayed by her side, murmuring encouragement in both Apache and English, showing her how to breathe through the pain. Taza kept the fire stoked and the water hot, while Reverend Hale prayed quietly in the corner, his Bible open on his lap. "You're doing well, child," Hale would say whenever Clara's strength seemed to falter. "The Lord is with you." Near midnight, the contractions intensified. Clara gripped Nalin's hand so hard her knuckles went white, but the older woman never flinched. She sang softly in Apache, ancient birthing songs that seemed to give Clara new strength. "I see the head," Nalin announced as false dawn began to light the eastern sky. "Push now, sister." Push, Clara gathered her remaining strength. With a final, tremendous effort, she pushed. The cabin filled with a new sound, the strong, healthy cry of a newborn baby. "A girl," Nalin proclaimed, quickly wrapping the infant in one of Hale's clean blankets. "A beautiful girl." The first rays of true dawn streamed through the cabin windows as Nalin placed the swaddled baby in Clara's arms. Clara gazed down at her daughter through tears of joy and exhaustion. The baby had a thick shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything, even in these first moments. "Lena," Clara whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand. "Lena Morning Star," she looked up at Nalin. "The Morning Star guided you here to help bring her into the world. It's only right she carries that name." Nalin nodded approvingly. "A strong name. A name of light." After cleaning up and making sure both mother and baby were comfortable, Nalin gestured to Taza. "Hold your niece," she said firmly. "She should know your strength." Taza approached almost hesitantly, his large hands looking impossibly big next to the tiny bundle. But when Clara placed Lena in his arms, something shifted in his expression. He cradled her with infinite care, studying her small features with wonder. "I will guard you always, little one," he promised softly in Apache, then repeated it in English so Clara could understand. "No harm will come to you while I draw breath." Reverend Hale stepped forward then, placing one hand gently on the baby's head. His voice was thick with emotion as he prayed. "Heavenly Father, watch over this child. Shield her from those who would do her harm. Let her grow in wisdom and grace, knowing she is loved by you and by this family you have brought together. Guide her steps and light her path all the days of her life. Amen." Clara couldn't hold back her tears as she watched these three people, her new family, gather around her daughter. Each of them had risked so much to protect her and her unborn child. Now looking at Lena's peaceful face, she felt something she hadn't experienced since Thomas's death. Hope. "She have a future," Clara said softly, reaching out to touch Lena's cheek. "A real future with people who love her for who she is." Nalin squeezed her hand. "Every child is a gift," she said. "This one brings many hearts together." Through the open cabin door, they could hear birds greeting the new day. The morning star still shone faintly in the lightening sky, a reminder of the precious name this child would carry. Inside the cabin, the mingled scents of sage and pine resin drifted on the cool morning air, blessing this moment of new beginnings. The days following Lena's birth settled into a gentle rhythm at the cabin. Early autumn painted the mountains in soft golds and reds, while inside, Clara learned the ways of motherhood. She sat in Taza's wooden rocking chair, crafted years ago for his own wife, learning to nurse Lena in the filtered morning light. "There now, little one," she whispered, stroking Lena's dark hair as the baby suckled. The familiar creak of the chair's runners against the plank floor had become a comfort to them both. Outside, the steady thunk of Taza's axe marked his morning work. He had been methodically cutting and stacking firewood, preparing for the coming winter. The woodpile grew daily, neat rows of split pine and oak reaching nearly to the cabin's eaves. Clara watched through the window as he worked, his powerful shoulders moving with practiced efficiency. He paused often to scan the surrounding forest, a habit born of long years living alone in these hills. Though he never spoke of it, Clara knew he felt responsible for their safety. When Lena finished nursing, Clara wrapped her snugly and carried her outside to watch Taza work. The October air held a crisp bite, promising colder days ahead. Taza had already noticed the first loose shingles on the cabin's roof, and now he climbed up daily to patch worn spots before the autumn rains began. "Mind the ladder," he called. Down, hammer in hand. Loose rung near bottom. Clara smiled at his protectiveness. "We're fine here," she assured him, bouncing Lena gently. "Though I reckon she likes watching her uncle work." The peace of their morning shattered with the arrival of Nalin. Her horse's hooves pounded up the trail, far faster than her usual careful pace. Clara's heart jumped at the sound, and even Taza quickly descended the ladder, his face tightening. With concern.Nalin dismounted in a rush, her usually calm demeanor replaced by urgent energy. She carried a bundle wrapped in deerskin, but her news came before she even handed over the venison. "The bounty has changed," she said, catching her breath. "Judge Keen has tripled the reward." Clara clutched Lena closer to her chest. "How much?" $300 now, Nalin replied grimly. "And the notice names you both, mother and child." Her voice hardened as she added, "It calls Lena the half-breed child." Taza's hands clenched at his sides. "When did you see this?" "Posted yesterday in Silver Creek Settlement. Every trading post will have it soon." Nalin unwrapped the venison, but her movements were distracted. "I brought meat. You may need strength for what comes." They gathered inside the cabin, speaking in low voices while Lena slept in her cradle. Clara tried to focus on Nalin's instructions for preserving the venison, but her hands trembled as she worked. The morning's peace felt like a distant memory dot as afternoon light slanted through the trees. Taza stepped outside for his usual patrol of the perimeter. He returned moments later, his expression grave. "Smoke," he said simply, pointing south toward Mesquite Crossing. "Too much for cooking fires." They watched from the cabin door as the distant smoke column grew, dark against the clear autumn sky. Clara felt sick with dread. "The mission?" Taza nodded slowly. "Could be. We wait for word." The waiting stretched through the afternoon and into dusk. Nalin paced between windows while Clara nursed Lena again, unable to settle. Taza cleaned his rifle with methodical focus, though his eyes frequently lifted to check the growing darkness outside. The riders arrived just after nightfall, 2 men from the settlement, their horses lathered from hard riding. Taza met them outside while Clara listened from behind the door. Lena held close against her shoulder. "Mission's gone," one rider reported, voice rough with smoke and emotion. "Railroad men came with Keen's guns. Said they were claiming the well for unpaid taxes, but they didn't wait for papers. Just started shooting and setting fires." "Reverend Hale?" Taza's question was sharp with concern, alive barely. "Some Apache families pulled him out through the back when the firing started. He's hurt but hiding safe with them now." The rider spat in disgust. "Keen's men are watching the ruins, waiting to dig that well deeper for the railroad." Clara sank into the rocking chair, her legs weak. The mission had been her first sanctuary, Reverend Hale her first protector. Now it was gone, and the violence was spreading outward, reaching for her and Lena like fingers of smoke. After the riders left, Taza moved with quiet purpose. He began gathering supplies, dried meat, corn, beans, an extra blanket. His rifle never left arm's reach as he worked. Clara watched him, understanding without words. Their safety here was ending. "How long do we have?" she asked softly. Tazia paused in his packing, his face shadowed in the lamplight. "Not long. They will follow the rider's tracks by morning light." His eyes were hard with resolve as he added, "But we will be gone before they come." Clara looked around the cabin that had sheltered them, had seen Lena's first breath and first days. Like the mission, it would soon be just a memory. She held Lena closer, drawing strength from her daughter's warm weight. "Where will we go?" She whispered, but Taza was already moving again, checking his ammunition and adding more supplies to their growing pile. His silence was answer enough. Their destination would have to remain unspoken. Another secret to keep them safe. Outside, a coyote called in the darkness, its lone voice echoing off the hillsides. Clara rocked Lena gently, watching Taza's preparations. With a heavy heart, the peace they had built here lay in ashes, like the mission to the south, and the night ahead held only uncertainty. Gray dawn light crept over the mountains, painting the valley in dim shadows. Taza moved like a ghost through the morning mist, checking the surrounding terrain from a rocky outcrop above his cabin. The first hints of sunrise revealed what he feared most: dust clouds rising from the southern trail. He counted 6 riders. Maybe more, their shapes dark against the pale morning sky. Even at this distance, sunlight glinted off rifle barrels. They were following the tracks from last night's visitors. Just as he'd predicted, Taza descended quickly, his moccasins silent, on the pine needle carpet. Inside the cabin, Clara already had Lena wrapped warmly, the baby quiet against her chest in a sling Nalin had shown her how to tie. "Riders coming," Taza said simply. 6, maybe 8. 2 hours, no more. Clara nodded, her face pale but determined. She moved with careful efficiency, gathering Lena's few precious items: a soft deerskin blanket, clean cloth diapers, the rattle Taza had carved during quiet evening hours. Her hands trembled slightly, but her movements stayed purposeful. Taza lifted the trapdoor to his root cellar, the wooden planks groaning softly. The earthen chamber below held his most valuable possessions: his father's ceremonial items, his late wife's beaded necklaces, trading papers that proved his land claims. He wrapped everything carefully in oiled cloth, tucking the bundles into the deepest corner where moisture couldn't reach. "Will they find it?" Clara whispered, watching him work. Taza shook his head. "Ground will look undisturbed when I'm done." His large hands smoothed the dirt floor carefully after he closed the trapdoor, scattering pine needles across the surface. Thunder rumbled in the distance, drawing their attention to the window. Dark clouds had gathered over the mountains, unusual for this early in the day. The air felt heavy with coming rain. "Storm might slow them," Clara said hopefully. Securing the last of their supplies in a pack, Taza checked his rifle one final time, then slung it across his back. "Maybe bring more than rain," he replied, studying the angry sky. "Mountains are dangerous in storms." They left through the back door, Taza leading them along a narrow deer trail that wound up into the pines. Clara followed carefully, one hand supporting Lena, the other using a walking stick Taza had cut for her. Behind them, the cabin grew smaller, becoming just another shadow in the forest. The first fat raindrops fell as they reached higher ground. Thunder crashed closer now, and the wind picked up, bending the pine tops. Taza kept them moving steadily north, pausing occasionally to listen for pursuit. A sudden crack split the air, not thunder, but the sound of waterlogged earth giving way. The ground trembled beneath their feet. Taza pulled Clara behind a massive pine trunk, sheltering her and Lena as a terrible roar filled the valley. Through gaps in the trees, they watched as tons of mud and rock slid down the mountainside. The rain-swollen creek had undermined the slope above the pass. Now that narrow gap, the only direct route to the cabin, filled with debris. "Lord have mercy," Clara breathed, clutching Lena closer. They could hear distant shouts of alarm. The riders had been close to the pass when it collapsed. Horses whinnied in panic. But the sounds came from the other side of the new barrier. "We go now," Taza said firmly. While they must ride around. The rain fell steadily as they pushed deeper into the forest. Water dripped from pine boughs, soaking through their clothes. Clara stumbled occasionally on the slick ground, but Taza's strong hand steadied her each time. Lena remained remarkably quiet. Lulled perhaps by their constant movement, they traveled through the worst of the storm, stopping only when Clara needed to nurse Lena under the shelter of a large pine. Taza used these breaks to check their back trail, though the rain washed away any tracks almost as soon as they made them dot. As afternoon faded toward evening, the rain finally slackened. They were high in the mountains now, where the air grew thin and cold. Clara's legs trembled with exhaustion, and even Taza's steady stride had slowed. "There," he said suddenly, pointing to a dark opening in a rocky hillside. "Cave, small but dry." The shallow cave proved just deep enough for shelter, its entrance partially hidden by a curtain of vine maple. Taza checked it carefully for signs of animals before allowing Clara and Lena inside. The stone floor sloped slightly upward, keeping it dry despite the day's rain. "Rest now," he told Clara, helping her settle on the driest spot. "I will make fire." Despite their wet conditions, Taza's woodcraft proved equal to the task. He gathered dry tinder from protected spots beneath fallen logs, carefully built a small fire, and positioned rocks to reflect the heat inward while shielding the light from outside view. Clara held her hands toward the warmth, color slowly returning to her cold fingers. She had managed to keep Lena relatively dry beneath her shawl, and now the baby nursed contentedly, tiny fingers curling and uncurling in the firelight. "How far tomorrow?" Clara asked quietly. "Apache lands by midday," Taza replied, laying their wet clothes near the fire to dry. "My cousin's family camps there now, moving the herds to winter grounds." He added more small sticks to the fire, careful to keep the smoke minimal. "They will welcome us." Clara nodded, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. The day's fear and exertion caught up with her all at once. She leaned back against the cave wall, Lena secure in her arms, and let her eyes close. Taza watched them both for a long moment. The firelight softened Clara's tired features, making her look even younger than her 17 years. Lena's small face relaxed in sleep, one hand still clutching her mother's dress. His chest tightened with familiar protective instinct. He moved silently to the cave entrance, rifle ready across his knees. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving behind a clean, cold night. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called, a good sign, meaning no other large creatures moved nearby. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, they were safe. The landslide that had blocked their pursuers seemed more than mere chance. To Taza, his people had stories of the mountains themselves rising to protect those in need. Perhaps the old tales held more truth than some believed. He settled in to watch through the night, listening to Clara and Lena's quiet breathing behind him, while overhead, stars began to appear between breaks in the clouds. Morning mist clung to the pines as Taza led them north along ancient paths worn smooth by generations of footsteps. Clara rode his most gentle mare, Lena secured against her chest in the sling. The baby's dark eyes watched the swaying tree branches above, tiny hands reaching toward dancing shadows. The trail wound through stands of oak and juniper before opening onto a high mesa. Ahead, weathered rocks rose like sentinels around a natural bowl in the earth. The Spanish well lay there, its waters sacred to Taza's people, long before European boots had touched this soil. As they descended the rocky path, sounds of singing drifted up, deep voices chanting prayers as old as the mountains themselves. Around the well's stone rim, a circle of elders sat wrapped in blankets against the morning chill. White hair gleamed in the early light as they swayed, calling to the rain spirits. Taza dismounted first, helping Clara down carefully. He approached the circle with proper respect, waiting until the song ended before speaking softly in Apache. The eldest man, face deeply lined like the surrounding rocks, nodded slowly and gestured for them to join. A familiar figure rose from among the women. Nalan her dark eyes worried but warm. She embraced Clara gently, mindful of Lena, then began unpacking supplies from her horse. Thick wool blankets, dried meat, fresh cornbread still warm from her morning fire. Word spreads fast as wind, Nalin said quietly, settling beside Clara. Railroad men boast in saloons about taking mission well. Say more land will follow. She touched Lena's cheek softly. Many angry, some afraid. The eldest man, White Hawk, spoke in Apache, his voice gravelly with age. Taza translated for Clara. He says you and the child are welcome here. Our people know Judge King's cruelty. Know how he twists white man's law against us. Clara bowed, her head respectfully. Thank you. I wish we brought better news than trouble. White Hawk smiled slightly, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. He spoke again, and Taza translated. Trouble finds us whether we seek it or not. Better to face it standing together than falling alone. The morning passed in quiet conversation as the elders shared their concerns. King had been systematically stripping water rights from Apache lands, using legal documents few could read and fewer could fight. The mission well was just his latest theft. He will try courts next, warned another elder, Gray Wolf, who had once worked as a scout for the army. Use white man's papers to claim child has no rights here. His English was careful but clear. Judge holds much power in territory. Clara held Lena closer, her jaw set. He holds power because people fear him. Because he works in shadows. Taza nodded slowly, like snake under rock. Bring to sunlight, loses poison. They spent that night near the well, sleeping under stars while the elders maintained their prayer vigil. The next day passed in waiting, with Nalin teaching Clara more about caring for Lena using Apache traditions, which plants helped with colic, how to wrap the baby to keep her secure during long rides. On the third morning, hoofbeats announced a rider approaching. Taza recognized the way the horse moved before he saw the rider, Reverend Hale's old paintmar, her gait as steady as her master's faith. The Reverend looked trail-worn but undefeated, his silver hair wild under his hat. His saddlebags bulged with saved papers from the mission. His usually neat black coat was smoky gray with ash, but his eyes sparkled with purpose. The Lord works in mysterious ways, he said, accepting a cup of coffee from Nalin. Those railroad men were so busy burning my chapel, they clean forgot about my office. He patted his saddlebags. Every letter, every illegal contract, every record of bribes paid, all safe and sound. Hope flickered across Clara's tired face. Proof of what they've done? Proof enough to hang them legally, Halle confirmed. If we can get it before an honest court, he sighed heavily. Though that's harder to find than hen's teeth in these parts, with Keene controlling most judges between here and Tucson. Taza had been listening quietly, watching the sun climb higher over the sacred well. Now he spoke, his deep voice thoughtful. Then we take to main courthouse, where more eyes watch, where Keene cannot hide truth so easy. The elders murmured, among themselves considering. White Hawk spoke at length in Apache, gesturing toward the well, the mountains, the dawn sky. Taza translated for the others. He says truth is like water, it finds its own path. We can guide it, but not force it. If we trust in right path, others will see. Clara stood carefully, Lena sleeping against her shoulder. Reverend Halle is right, they counted on fear keeping us hidden. But Lena deserves to be seen, to be known. She belongs to both worlds, and both should recognize her. It's dangerous, Nalin warned softly. Keene's men watch roads. More dangerous to let him win, Clara replied. To let him steal more land. More lives, more futures. She touched Lena's dark hair gently. My husband died trying to stop them. I won't hide while they take everything he fought for. Taza rose, his height casting a long shadow in the morning light. Then we ride. Not as thieves in night, but as people claiming right. He looked at Reverend Halle. You have proof of their true theft. We have proof of their lies, living proof. He gestured to Clara and Lena. Time to show both in full day. The elders nodded approval, raising their hands in blessing. White Hawk spoke a final time, and this time Clara understood his meaning. Even before Taza translated, "May the same spirits that guard this sacred water guard your path to justice." They spent the rest of that morning preparing. Nalan packed food and medical supplies, while Reverend Hale organized his documents. Taza checked weapons and horses, his movements precise and unhurried. Clara wrapped Lena in her warmest blanket, singing softly a blend of settler hymn and Apache lullaby that somehow fit together like rain on stone. The decision was made. They would ride to the courthouse together, bringing truth into the light. Flight would become fight, but not with guns or violence, with law and witness and the simple power of standing openly for what was right. As the sun reached its peak, they mounted up. The elders' prayers followed them, mixing with the wind through the pines and the gentle splash of sacred waters. Ahead lay risk and hope, danger and justice, all twined together like the twin histories flowing through Lena's veins. Taza led them. Down from the high place, away from the Spanish well where prayers still rose like morning mist. Clara rode beside him, head high, no longer running. Behind them came Reverend Hale with his precious proof, and Nalan with her healing wisdom. They rode together toward whatever waited in the valley below, while overhead, hawks circled in the endless blue sky, watching their journey begin. Dawn painted the eastern sky in pale gold as they left the Spanish well behind. Taza led their small group down winding trails, choosing paths that offered cover while remaining passable for Clara's wagon. They moved like shadows through the landscape, careful to avoid the main roads where Keen's men might lurk. The first night found them at the Martinez homestead, where old Pedro Martinez remembered Taza's help during a harsh winter. His wife, Maria, crossed herself at the sight of Clara and the baby, then hurried to warm soup and fresh tortillas for them all. Their barn offered safe shelter for the horses, and the hayloft became a watching post where Taza could survey the surrounding valley. "My sons will keep watch tonight," Pedro assured them in careful English, his weathered face serious. "You rest. No one comes here without we know first." Clara sat by the kitchen fire, Lena nursing quietly beneath a light blanket. The warmth and Maria's gentle fussing eased some of the tension from her shoulders. Reverend Hale spread his papers on the rough wooden table, organizing them by date, building their case piece by piece. When night fell fully, they gathered to pray Hale's measured words in English mixing with Maria's soft Spanish prayers and Taza's low Apache blessing. It felt right, somehow, like streams joining into a river. The second day brought them to Sarah Cooper's small farm. The young schoolteacher took one look at Clara's trail-worn dress and shook her head. "You can't face a judge looking like that," she declared, leading Clara inside. "I've got something that should fit." She disappeared into her bedroom, returning with a navy blue dress, simple but well made. "It's not fancy, but it's respectable. And clean." Clara touched the fabric reverently. "I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will," Sarah insisted. "A jury sees with their eyes first. You need to look like what you are, a proper mother protecting her child." That evening, while Lena slept in a borrowed cradle, Clara practiced telling her story. Reverend Hale played the role of questioning lawyer while Taza and Sarah listened carefully. "Remember," Hale coached, "stick to facts. When did you marry Thomas? When did the railroad men come? What exactly did Judge Keen say to you?" Clara's voice grew stronger with each retelling. The pain was still there, but now it served her purpose rather than overwhelming her. The third day brought rain. They sheltered an abandoned line shack, Taza riding out regularly to check their back. Trail despite the weather. Each time he returned more soaked, but his eyes were calm, no signs of pursuit yet. Lena fussed in the damp air. Clara held her close, singing softly, one hand over her daughter's mouth when wagon wheels creaked on the nearby road. They all held their breath until the sound faded. Almost halfway there, Nalin whispered, squeezing Clara's shoulder. "You're doing well, both of you." The fourth night they stayed with a Quaker family who asked no questions, but offered clean beds and fresh milk. Their teenage son had a telescope, and he let Taza use it to scan the horizon at dusk. Far off, dust rose from riders moving fast, but they were headed away, not toward. Clara sat with the Quaker mother, learning to wrap Lena so she could nurse quietly while walking. "A mother must be ready for anything," the older woman said simply. Demonstrating the tight but comfortable knots. The final day of travel brought them within sight of the town. They made camp early in a dense grove of cottonwoods, close enough to see the courthouse clock tower rising above the buildings, but far enough to remain hidden. Reverend Hawley rode in alone to assess the situation. He returned as sunset painted the sky crimson. "Word's out," he reported grimly. "Keen's men are watching the roads. But there's talk in town, people wondering why a judge would put such a high bounty on a young mother and baby. Questions being asked that he can't answer easily." Taza nodded. Slowly. "Good. Questions make cracks in walls of fear." That night, their last before facing whatever waited in town, they sat close around a small fire. Clara wore Sarah's dress, now carefully pressed. Lena slept peacefully in her arms, one tiny hand curled around her mother's finger. Reverend Hale's prayers were stronger than usual, his voice carrying quiet conviction. "Lord, guide us toward justice. Give us strength to stand in truth. Protect this child and her mother. Help us shine light into dark places." Taza added his own prayer, Apache, the words flowing like water over stones. Nalin harmonized softly, her hand on Clara's shoulder. The stars wheeled overhead, countless as the hopes and fears in their hearts. Before they slept, Clara spoke softly. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you all to know." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "You've given Lena and me something precious. A family. A belonging. Whatever the judge decides, no one can take that away. Dawn would bring what it would bring." For now, they rested under the cottonwoods, their small camp a circle of trust in the gathering dark. In town, the courthouse clock tolled 9 times, each bell note floating clear and inevitable as tomorrow's sunrise. The courthouse steps gleamed with morning dew as townspeople gathered, their voices a low murmur of speculation. Clara stood in the shadow of a cottonwood tree, her heart pounding beneath Sarah Cooper's navy dress. Lena slept against her chest, wrapped securely in a soft blanket. Taza positioned himself slightly ahead of them, his tall frame blocking curious onlookers. Reverend Hawley clutched his leather satchel of documents, while Nalin adjusted Clara's shawl one final time. "Remember," Hawley whispered, "let me present the evidence first. When I signal, that's your moment." The courthouse doors opened at precisely 9 o'clock. People filed in, filling the wooden benches until they creaked. The air grew thick with the smell of wool coats and tobacco. Railroad men clustered near the front, their suits dusty from travel. Agent Murrow sat among them, his smile sharp as a coyote's. Judge Randolph Keene swept in through his private door, black robes billowing. His silver hair caught the morning light streaming through tall windows. He settled into his chair like a king on his throne, surveying the crowd with practiced authority. "Court is now in session," the bailiff called out, his voice echoing off whitewashed walls. Keene's eyes narrowed when he spotted Reverend Hawley approaching the bench. "Reverend, I trust you have good reason for requesting this special hearing?" "I do indeed, Your Honor." Hale's voice carried clearly despite his age. "I bring evidence of judicial misconduct regarding water rights and land claims." A ripple of whispers swept the courtroom. Keene's knuckles whitened on his gavel. "Serious accusations require serious proof, Reverend, which is precisely what I have here." Hawley opened his satchel, removing a leather-bound ledger. These are the mission's official records, including correspondence between Your Honor and certain railroad interests. Railroad Agent Murrow shifted in his seat. Other men in suits exchanged glances. Hawley continued, laying out papers one by one. Bank draft showing payments to Your Honor's private account. Dates matching exactly with your rulings against Apache land claims. Most particularly, he held up a document. A receipt for 50 pieces of gold, delivered the day before you ordered the mission well seized. Keen's face flushed red. Those records were destroyed in the fire. These were kept in my home safe, Hawley replied calmly, as was my habit with sensitive documents. This is outrageous, Keen thundered, rising from his chair. I won't be slandered by a decrepit preacher and his imagined conspiracy. Besides which, the girl Clara Bell has no standing here. She's a runaway ward, nothing more. The moment had come. Clara stepped forward, Lena stirring against her chest. The crowd parted, creating a path to the front of the courtroom. Her legs trembled, but her voice remained steady. I am Clara Bell Morningstar, she announced clearly. And I have every right to be heard. Keen's face went from red to white. You dare! I dare speak truth, Clara continued, reaching into her pocket. She withdrew a folded paper, crisp and official. This is my marriage certificate, signed by Federal Marshal James Cooper last spring. It proves I was legally wed to Thomas Morningstar, son of John Morningstar, whose land you seized 5 years ago. The paper passed from hand to hand up to the judge's bench. Keen unfolded it with trembling fingers. The federal seal was unmistakable, the marshal's signature bold and clear. My daughter Lena, Clara went on, drawing back the blanket to reveal. The sleeping baby's face is legitimate heir to both her father's Apache heritage and his legal claims. The very claims you tried to erase with blood money. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Women leaned forward to see the baby. Men whispered behind their hands. The railroad agents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Keen's face had gone gray. The marriage certificate shook in his hands as his eyes darted between the document, Clara, and the damning ledger of bribes before him. Taza moved to stand beside Clara, his presence steady and protective. Nowlin flanked her other side, chin raised proudly. Reverend Hawley faced the bench, his evidence spread out like cards in a winning hand, the silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Even Lena seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, staying perfectly still in her mother's arms. Through the tall windows, morning sun painted bars of light across the courtroom floor. Like truth breaking through prison walls, the heavy courtroom doors burst open as Sheriff Marcus Wade strode in, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. Behind him came 3 deputies and a group of Apache elders who had witnessed the mission burning. The sheriff's weathered face was grim as he approached the bench. Judge Keen, he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the packed room. These good folk have signed sworn statements about your dealings with the railroad, about threats made, about men paid to burn down the mission. Keen gripped his gavel like a weapon. This is absurd. I am the law in this county, not anymore. Sheriff Wade pulled a warrant from his vest. By order of the territorial governor, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and abuse of office. The railroad men began edging toward the door, but deputies blocked their path. Agent Murrow's smug smile vanished as Sheriff Wade pointed at him. You'll be coming along too, Mr. Murrow. Got witnesses who saw you pass gold to the judge's messenger. When Keen tried to stand, his legs buckled. 2 deputies moved forward to steady him, the clink of handcuffs sharp in the stunned silence. The proud judge seemed to shrink as the iron closed around his wrists. The territorial court, Sheriff Wade continued, has already reviewed Reverend Hale's evidence. They've declared all recent water rights decisions void, pending review. He turned to face the crowd. The mission well and surrounding water sources are hereby returned to their rightful owners, the mission itself and the Apache peoples whose lands depend on them. Clara's knees went weak. She clutched Lena closer, tears streaming down her face. The baby slept on, peaceful in the midst of justice being served. Taza's strong hand found Clara's shoulder, steadying her. Though he didn't speak, his presence radiated quiet triumph. Reverend Holly raised his arms toward heaven. "Thank you, Lord, for bringing truth to light." His cracked voice rang with joy. "Thank you for protecting the innocent and exposing the wicked. Amen." The word rolled through the courtroom like thunder, spoken by settlers and Apache alike. Even the sheriff nodded, removing his hat as deputies led Keen and Murrow away. The judge's face was ashen. He wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. The man who had terrorized so many now looked small, defeated by nothing more than truth spoken aloud. The clerk read the official verdict, his voice steady. By order of the territorial court, all water rights are restored to their original holders. The railroad's claims are null and void. The mission at Mesquite Crossing shall retain its historic water rights in perpetuity, to be shared with neighboring Apache lands as has been traditional. Clara couldn't stop her tears, but they were tears of relief, of gratitude. Lena stirred slightly, and Clara kissed her daughter's dark hair. Everything they had risked, the desperate flight, the hiding, the dangerous journey to town, had been worth it. Justice had prevailed. The first frost came early that year, dusting the Mogollon pines with white while golden leaves still clung to the aspens. Down at Mesquite Crossing, the sound of hammers rang through crisp autumn air as volunteers rebuilt the mission. This time, they used stone hauled from the nearby quarry, laying solid walls that would stand against both weather and men's evil intentions. Reverend Holly supervised the work from a rough-hewn bench, his silver hair catching the sunlight as he studied the plans spread across his lap. The new mission would be larger, with room for a proper schoolhouse where both settler and Apache children could learn together. But up in the mountains, in Taza's cabin, life settled into quieter rhythms. Clara stood at the cookfire, stirring a pot of venison stew while Lena slept in a beautifully beaded cradle board, a gift from Nalin. The morning light streamed through the window Taza had added, falling across the swept wooden floor where Clara's rocking chair now sat. Nalin visited often, bringing dried berries and stories, teaching Clara the Apache ways of preserving food and caring for a baby. Other women from the band came too, each bringing something to share: a blanket, a cooking pot, wisdom about herbs that could soothe a teething child. Their acceptance wrapped around Clara like a warm shawl as the days grew shorter and the nights colder. Taza spoke more frequently of making things official. "The band should know you as family," he said one evening, his deep voice gentle. "Not just as ones I protect, but as daughter and granddaughter under tribal law." Clara's heart swelled at his words. She had found more than safety here. She had found belonging. The adoption ceremony took place on the first truly cold morning of winter, when breath frosted in the air and fresh snow lay thick on the ground. The elders gathered in a circle outside the cabin, their blankets bright against the white landscape. Nalin stood beside Clara, who held Lena close against the chill. Taza built a small fire of cedar wood, and the sweet smoke rose straight up through the still air. The eldest grandmother stepped forward, her face creased with years of wisdom, and spoke the ancient words that would make Clara and Lena part of the band forever. She marked their foreheads with sacred ash, naming them as Taza's family before the people and the Creator. That evening, after the celebrations ended and the visitors departed, Clara stood in the cabin doorway. Lena slept peacefully in her cradleboard while Taza banked the fire for the night. Outside, moonlight turned the snow-covered pines to silver. An owl called softly from somewhere in the forest. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter and breathed in the cold, clean air. She thought of how far she had come from those desperate days in the arroyo, from a frightened girl with nowhere to turn, to a woman with a home, a daughter, and a family who would stand beside her always. Peace settled over her like the snow that blanketed the quiet land. February brought deep snows to the Mogollon Mountains, turning Taza's cabin into an island of warmth in a sea of white. Inside, the stone fireplace radiated steady heat from carefully banked logs, filling the single room with the sweet scent of pine smoke. A thick layer of snow pressed against the cabin walls, nature's own insulation against the winter winds that howled outside. Lena, now 5 months old, lay on a deerskin blanket spread before the hearth. Her dark eyes tracked the shadows that danced on the ceiling, and her delighted giggles echoed off the wooden beams. She had grown strong and healthy through the winter months, her cheeks round and rosy, her tiny fingers always reaching for something new to explore. Clara stood at the iron cookstove, stirring a pot of rabbit stew thick with wild onions and dried corn. Steam rose from the bubbling surface, carrying with it the rich aroma of herbs Nalin had brought on her last visit. The wooden spoon moved in slow circles as Clara hummed an old hymn, one Reverend Hawley used to sing during morning prayers. At the mission dot near the window, Taza sat on a low stool, his large hands moving with surprising delicacy as he worked on repairing a snowshoe frame. The ash wood strips lay across his lap as he carefully rewove the rawhide webbing. A pile of thin strips soaked in a basin of warm water beside him, making them pliable enough to work with. The afternoon light filtering through the frost-covered window caught the silver threads, beginning to show in his dark hair. The quiet domesticity of the scene belied the journey that had brought them here. Each object in the cabin told part of their story. The rocking chair where Clara nursed Lena, the beaded cradleboard hanging on the wall, the stack of split wood that represented hours of Taza's labor to keep them warm. Even the tin cups on the shelf spoke of shared meals and conversations that had slowly knit them into a family. As dusk approached, the light outside began to fade from pearl gray to deeper blue. Clara moved to light the oil lamp, its gentle glow pushing back the gathering shadows. Lena had begun to fuss, making the small sounds that meant she was ready for her evening meal. Taza set aside his work and lifted her with practiced ease, cradling her against his chest. Someone had given Clara a patchwork quilt, its squares made from scraps of calico and muslin. She draped it around Lena and Taza's shoulders, tucking the edges to keep out any draft. The baby settled immediately in Taza's arms, one tiny hand clutching the collar of his wool shirt. Clara watched them for a moment, her heart full. The memories of that scorching day in the arroyo seemed both distant and vivid, the cracked earth, her parched throat, the flies buzzing around her head. She had been certain she would die there, alone and afraid. But then Taza had appeared. Like an answer to prayers she had been too weak to voice. "You told me to take your hand that day," Clara said softly, moving to stand beside Taza's chair. The firelight caught the silver beads in her hair, gifts from the women of the band who now called her sister. "I never let go." Taza looked up at her, his eyes warm with understanding. Lena stirred in his arms, making small contented sounds as she drifted toward sleep. "And I never will," he replied, his deep voice gentle but firm with promise. Outside, snow continued to fall in the growing darkness. The wind picked up, driving white flakes against the cabin walls and soft pattering sounds. But inside, the fire crackled steadily, and the stew simmered on the stove, filling the air with its savory scent. The lamp cast a golden glow over the family, the tall Apache man who had opened his heart and home, the young settler woman who had found safety in his care, and the sleeping child who represented hope for a different future. Here, in this warm space they had created together, there was no need for more words. The quiet strength of their bond, forged through danger and sealed by choice, spoke louder than any declaration. They had become what each needed most, a family built on trust, protected by love and blessed by both Apache tradition and Christian faith. Thank you for watching. If this one reached you, consider subscribing. I'll be back tomorrow with more meaning, more humanity,